please welcome Ilan Gur.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations to the Engine on an amazing Tough Tech Summit. It's so great and fun and inspiring to be part of this community and see the Tough Tech community that the Engine's been building, and the fact that this event has come together so well amidst COVID and working remotely is, I think, just a testament to all that hard work. So thank you for all the hard work, Engine team. And it's afternoon, at least for those in the East Coast. It's kind of toward the end of the program. My job is to keep the energy up and high here. I am privileged to have a chance to have this conversation with Matt Rogers, the founder of Nest, and now maybe equally importantly, if not more, the founder of Insight, which is going to change the world and is changing the world in incredible ways. And on a personal note, a friend and board member of mine who I've gotten to know over the last few years. So Matt, thanks so much for being here. This is going to be fun.
Indeed. Awesome.
Indeed. We're going to count.
I would say good to see everyone, but I do not see everyone.
Good to see you, Matt. So a couple of just notes before we jump in here. We're hoping this conversation, the morning keynote conversation with Katie and Mariana and Tom was awesome, and big picture policy, what do governments do? A lot of intellectual might there. I think we're meant to be, Matt, the contrast, which is we're going to go deep and personal and talk about what it means to be a hard tech founder and bring some balance to that. And I'm meant to remind everyone there's an opportunity to ask questions on the right side of your screen. You could submit the questions. When Matt and I discussed what are some ways we could make this panel interesting and fun, one of the ideas was, how about we just encourage folks to have no holds barred, totally. Go as provocative, as personal as you can. I realized, Matt, that the fact that the questions are public with their name associated with it might rein people in. So any inspiring words there to fire people up on questions?
Yeah, I mean, it's all good. Speaking as a fellow entrepreneur and fellow investor, I'm happy to give kind of the behind the scenes on whatever people are curious about hearing.
All right. So that's it. That's your challenge as an audience.
Yeah, it's all good.
I think Matt's resume and bio and reputation precede him. I'm going to try and intro you, Matt, from a personal perspective, which is we met, you don't know the whole story of this, but we met through a shared colleague, now friend, Noah Dyke, who runs an organization called Carbon 180. And Noah was an early supporter of ours when we were working on Cyclotron Road and thinking about how we could make it bigger with this vision for Activate. And he said to me at some point, he said, I met this guy. He's amazing. Matt Rogers, founder of Nest. You got to meet him. And I think I said, Noah, the number of conversations I've had from folks in the Valley, tech folks who have made money, been successful, where I have a conversation, they nod, they smile, they're excited about what we're doing. And the idea that they're really going to dive in and do something philanthropic, I don't buy it. And he said, it's different. You got to go chase them down. And so I think we met, I remember taking the BART in. I don't remember exactly where we met. And I'll keep this really quick, which is, I think we had a 40-minute conversation, which if you're talking to Matt Rogers feels like a 4-hour conversation.
Yes, high bandwidth.
The number of exchanges, the frequency of exchanges there are really high. And I think at the end of that conversation, you said, oh, okay, I get it. I'm in, let's do this. And I didn't really know what that meant. And I think what you meant was, I think I had, you meant I have enough data. This is important, what you're doing. And we have a chance to bring it from 0 to 1. Mm-hmm. And I remember going back to my team and saying, I don't really understand this conversation. It seems like Matt wants to be helpful. It was an amazing conversation. And what I learned from you is you were just starting Insight, and you were in this mindset where I think you just said, we have so much we need to do to improve the world, and I don't have time, and I got to get things from 0 to 1. and it's got to be about improving the world on a multidimensional way, and it's got to be now and at scale. So tell me a little bit about what your mindset was like at that moment, and tell everyone about Insight.
Yeah, so I mean, like, we've got so many grand challenges for humanity. I think about actually like this moment we're in right now illustrates like so many of them. Like we have, we've kind of gotten hit. We got whacked with everything this year, right? We got whacked with global pandemic. We've gotten whacked with climate change. We've gotten whacked with election security, information security, cyber warfare, you name it. We pretty much have gotten whacked with everything this year. And we need people solving the hard problems. And going back to that conversation years ago now, it was very clear that like you and your organization were building a platform for others to embark on that mission. And frankly, like especially in Silicon Valley, in this tech world we're in, all too few embark on those missions.
Tell us a little bit about your mission, because you were just transitioning out of Google after the acquisition from Nest and after doing a lot of great work at Google. So what was the origin story of Insight? How did that get from 0 to 1? And tell everyone about what the mission is of the organization.
Absolutely. Yes. Actually, I give my wife Swati a lot of credit. She's not only smarter than me, but actually she's got a much stronger moral compass than me and has been very clear-eyed about where we could be most impactful. And I wish the two of us grew up together in a small town in Florida. But she's like, I'd say like she's much more accomplished than me. And like Harvard, Rhodes Scholar, early at Google.org, and started many of her own businesses. And she was very clear about kind of where the gaps are. And as the two of us came into a lot of privilege from our sale to Google, it became super, super obvious that like we could do a lot, but where can we focus? And like not being a mega billionaire, like where are the areas where you could have immediate impact to get things going and get people started on important problems? So that's kind of where we started Insight with this idea of, hey, like angel investing is really powerful, but actually it could scale well beyond just angel investing in early stage startups. So we kind of broadened the purview to let's find entrepreneurs on a mission. Entrepreneurs being a very broad category of people who are wanting to start something new and starting something impactful, whether that's a new venture, whether it's a new nonprofit, whether it's a new ecosystem, or whether it's a social movement. And let's give them not just capital, but let's give them our time, our energy, and our networks to get them from 0 to 1.
So I'm going to try and empathize with the hard tech entrepreneurs or the tough tech entrepreneurs in the audience. There are two things that I have a hard time with when I was an entrepreneur working on tough tech in my startup, talking to investors. Two things would drive me crazy. One was just, endless diligence cycles that lost the forest for the trees. Right. Totally. The idea that someone was going to ask me a bunch of questions on things this narrow when the error bars around what we were building, were 100 times bigger on the timescale that mattered, just felt like a waste of time. That was one. And then number two was the idea of investors that, were really encouraging meeting after meeting. And then you just realized, or you talked to a friend and they said, that person's never going to write the first check. You come back to them after someone else is committed. And
so
what I've learned,
opposite point of view on this one.
So that's what I want to hear. So the exact opposite quadrant on whatever that 2x2 is. So tell us about how you do that. Yeah. Yeah.
So at the stage we invest, it's inappropriate to go too deep on diligence. Like the things that we look at are the caliber of the founding team of the entrepreneurs, and is the mission of significance and importance that it's worth us solving this. And that's pretty much what we look at. And then we've solved some of the let's call it the risk around hard tech by having multiple pools of capital. And this is, I think, again, like speaking to my wife's brilliance and innovation. So we have a foundation that writes grants, and Activate being one of the grantees of our foundation. But we also write investment checks out of our foundation using the balance sheet of the foundation. So most foundations, if folks aren't aware, just effectively like have money managers managing their money, and they're in public equities, and maybe they invest in bonds and, generalized portfolio management. There's like hundreds of $billions sitting on the sidelines in that kind of management. So we've decided to kind of do the opposite. Like we take the corpus of our foundation and we invest it in things that are, let's call it high impact, but they have a lot of risk, with the hope that one day as some of those businesses scale, like they'll return to the foundation, we'll do a lot more with it. But at the same time, if the money is lost, effectively we're a really good philanthropist and we wrote a grant. So we think about like different pools of capital for different stages of risk. But the reality is, like, for a lot of these founders that are approaching a really hard problem, they need a lot of runway to get going.
On the philanthropy side, I think you've been proud to take this approach of saying philanthropy is the most speculative form of capital to make impact.
100%.
So if we're going to go early, we're going to bet on people, we're going to be quick. We're not going to lose the forest for the trees, and kind of take things from 0 to 1 in a real way with a lot of risk. I've heard you in the past, or I've sensed you be frustrated that there aren't more people that take that approach. And one of the things that excites me about Insight is that hopefully you can be an example of excellence and that it catches fire. And so why do you think more philanthropy or even early stage, return-based investors aren't able to take that approach? What are the barriers, and how do we shift that?
I think there's a bizarre risk aversion out there. And you mentioned it when you're talking about investors, like they're not going to be the person to write your first check. The same is true with philanthropy. Despite philanthropy being the most risk loaded capital, you're going to give it away. Like the expected return is 0. There's a ridiculous amount of risk aversion, and you speak a lot about of having to take early bets, especially for some of these hard but important problems. I think philanthropic capital is a really good pool to draw on for that, because you think about mission alignment, looking at things like climate change, global health. These things are of massive human impact. And what better sources to draw on for our innovation than some of these effectively it's money that's already been given away.
You like Star Wars.
I do.
I know that.
Yeah.
I was trying to find some fun anchor points for this conversation, and I did a scroll through some of your tweets. One of my favorites is February 9th. You say, "The circle is now complete. Our 18-month-old points to my Star Wars shirt and says, 'That's a moon.'"
Yeah.
And your response was?
The circle is complete. So I've got 2 little kids. I've got a 5-month-old and now a 2-ish-year-old. And it's been really good motivation for, why we work on these important problems. Like my daughter, who's now it's called a little bit more than 2, hasn't seen her grandparents in 8 months. And our 5-month-old has never met his family. It's a bizarre thing to be able to say, no one in the family has met our new baby. So we've got to work on these problems that matter. It's not like these are things we'll pass on, kick the can down the road, wait for the next generation, or, we'll do this in the next Congress, or, we have these problems now. And we need entrepreneurs. We need the entire ecosystem around us working on these problems that matter. Because frankly, we have no more time.
Yeah. What I love is,
especially working on climate for the last decade, a lot of folks we've got till 2050. That's not how this works. Let's be clear. If we don't act now, we don't have a good 2050.
I love picturing you saying, "That's no moon," to your daughter in that conversation.
Yes. My daughter,
about Star Wars,
especially at that point in time, was obsessed with astronomy and planets, and it was a really weird thing for an 18-month-old to be able to recite the planets in order. And then at some point, she realized that Pluto is not a planet and was actually very upset about that. we were all upset about it when Pluto lost its plant status, but my daughter was especially worried.
That hits you right there in the heart.
Yeah.
I thought about Star Wars because we kind of jumped in here. We jumped in the middle on Insight. Star Wars starts with episode 4, like any in the spirit of the great Greek dramas. So I want to go back to maybe not episode 1, but episode 2 or 3 on this theme of 0 to 1. So you talked about sort of insight, and I hope we get a little more on that. But it occurred to me, you had this wildly, I think in your words, privileged opportunity to end up at Apple, working on Project Purple, which turned into the iPhone. And I'm sure that felt, you had that understanding of success. But I think you had a 0 to 1 moment in leaving Apple and starting Nest. And one of the things that comes to my mind for this audience is, it's different to be a founder, right? Obviously, to be a founder at T=0 is, one of the most exciting, but at times most lonely and hard things to do. And so I'd love to hear from you, for the audience, a little bit about, that transition from being a technologist at Apple to now being a founder, and having all of that on your shoulders. And what were some of the early kind of poignant moments that come to mind from Nest that maybe emblematic of that transition?
Oh my gosh. So in our first year, so we had a small office in a garage. God, I really miss having offices. And it was maybe 7 or 8 of us in the garage. A lot of folks that we had, Tony and I, my partner, I had worked with in our past lives. And we started working on how are we going to manufacture this thing? How are we going to build it? And if we were at Apple, well, we would call our partner in the operations team to then spin up a business operations team and start contract negotiations and RFPs. And it was one of those, we looked at ourselves oh, I guess we are also the operations team. Oh, I guess we're also the legal team. Okay, I guess, that's how this works. There's no backstop. You're kind of on your own. And it was one of those, it's things that we remember that are oh, yeah, we relied on so many other partners and help to build products at Apple. And we appreciated it, but I don't think we really appreciated how much support infrastructure exists when you're doing it as part of a larger organization. And when you're on your own, that's it. It's it's just the folks in the room, or in this case, the folks on the Zoom. And you do whatever you can. But sometimes, actually, we don't have to do it these days because we're all virtual. But sometimes we'd have to sweep the floors in the office, and it's a funny story actually. We had the CEO of Pegatron coming in. Pegatron being one of these very large Taiwanese-based contract manufacturers, and we wanted to make the office look nice. So I had to clean the bathroom before Denise came from Pegatron, and it was one of those sometimes you got to clean the bathrooms as a founder, but sometimes you got to put on your nice shirt and try to convince someone to quit their job or to bet on you. And it's a super dynamic job. I can't think of anything more dynamic where you could go from one day sweeping the floors and the next day pitching, one of the most well-known VCs in the world, or trying to convince a Fortune 50 company to back you. It's incredibly dynamic that way.
Do you you mentioned sort of waking up and saying, oh, all that support we had at Apple to do all these different things, we don't have that anymore. But you at least had the awareness that those functions needed to happen and how they worked.
Yes, that's true.
Do you think Nest would have worked had you not had the Apple experience? And when you think about funding hard tech founders that are just out of, say, a PhD, have never had a job, what's your advice to them, and how does that work?
Yeah, I've talked to folks about this exact thing, and this is actually one of the reasons why I'm a believer in Activate and what you do. It's really hard to start from zero without the network, the Rolodex, the experience, having done it before. It's really, really, really hard. And when Tony and I started Nest, we had effectively the privileged golden ticket path, in that we had built successful, high volume, high quality products for decades and had the credibility and networks to make it happen. And it was still hard for us. There were still dozens of moments where we could have failed and gone out of business many a time. So thinking about like a fresh PhD embarking on an impossible journey to solve a grand challenge, finding the right ecosystem and partnership, whether it's the engine, whether it's Activate, to help you get to one. Because once you get to one, then you've got money, you can start hiring a team, you can bring expertise around you. But man, like when you're starting at zero, like you gotta bring in help.
You had a chance to start as a founder, in this privileged position. I don't know whether anything comes to mind, but it can still be super hard and painful and lonely in certain times. Like, is there a low point moment from the early days of Nest that was a learning cycle for you?
Yeah, several. Several. The first product that we did was a thermostat. And we pushed it really hard on making it easy to install and easy to use, because we worried that if people couldn't install it, we're dead. It's DOA and the company is over. So we custom designed these connectors so you could put the wire in without even using a screwdriver. But the mechanical engineering that went into the mechanism of these buttons so that they could detect when the wire was in and that there was power on the wire, but enough power to charge the device, was extremely error prone. And there was a moment where we had spent probably $500,000 on tooling for these connectors, and they weren't reliable. Like there was many a time where, effectively they would drop connection in the middle of use. And it was, again, like speaking of a place of privilege, like we were able to call the CEO of Foxlink, which is one of the better connector manufacturers in the world, and say like, hey, like we really need help on this thing. Can you send some experts to take a look at what we've designed? And if we had not been able to call in that favor, we probably would have circled the drain for a year trying to figure out how to solve this problem, or had to back down on our promise and delivered an inferior product that probably wouldn't have caused us to catch on as much. So it's like there are many of these moments I could think of throughout the first 2 or 3 years that, like, if we had not been able to call on for help, found someone in our network who could introduce us to the right people to get us to the right place, I don't know where we would be. Look, I had to manage a product recall as an early stage company. It is brutal to do. And again, like if we did not have the fortunate backing and like long-term investors behind us, like that would probably sunk us.
Yeah. I mean, some of the things I'm hearing you talk about are, you're talking about managing, you're talking about reaching out and partners. I'm thinking to myself, like here's a geeky robotics whiz kid, out of CMU. The engine, one of the great things about the engine is kind of really being able to believe that technical founders, can be multi-dimensional leaders and really need to be at the center of creating these new tough tech businesses. One stage below, I think we're in the same mindset for Activate. And yet, like all the things that make you great as a techie and the training, some of those things come in handy. Some of those things get in your way. So I'm curious, like as you think about all of your journey, leading and building, these world-changing companies, what are some of the things where you've said, this is something that's a strength that I need to lean into? Let me put it a different way. This is a weakness that I need to try and change, versus this is a weakness or a blind spot. This is a weakness that I need to accept and be comfortable with and just go lean into my strengths. And how do you think about that balance?
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in self-awareness. I think great leaders, and actually great product people, have to have self-awareness. And as you mentioned, like identifying your weaknesses is probably like 90% of the battle. And especially when you're building teams, you want to not all have the same skills. And so my co-founder and I at Nest, Tony, we were both engineers. He had a double E background. I had more of a software firmware background. But the two of us decided actually, like explicitly, it's like, hey, like let's carve out a little bit of separate space for ourselves, and basically augment our weaknesses with team. So like I know I am not good at lists and spreadsheets and going super deep on all these lists and tracking. So like we did a crazy thing. Like most startups would say, like, that's insane. Our second employee was a program manager. And like, again, like most startups would be like, that's insane. That's a waste of money. Why would you possibly get a program manager for your second hire and give, massive equity, especially at that early stages? Like, I know what I'm not good at. And if we're going to build a product and be in the details, we got to have someone on the team who really knows how to track the details. And it turned out that Shige was a stellar hire, ended up running most of our engineering organization and our operations team as we grew. But actually, a lot of investors would say that's crazy. That's the wrong prioritization. But like, you got to know what you're good at. And like, I know I'm really good at communication, at empathy, at vision, at driving a team towards a mission. But I know I'm not good at keeping track of lists, and like, things are going to fall off the list and I wouldn't even know. So we built the team around our weaknesses. And like when Tony was leading the business side, our third hire, when we're after Shige, was someone who could help on product pitches and storytelling, and it was more of like a product marketing hire. Again, like many startups would say, that's crazy hiring a product marketing person in your first 5. But we knew it made sense based on what we wanted to do and what we're good at.
I love that anecdote. I think that's great. And I think it's an excuse to also, fast forward back to the present. I mean, one big piece of that is just like, how do you know what your lane is, what you can do well, and then how do you build around you to leverage and to scale? And so, it feels like part of Insight is about that, right? Is about recognizing this is what we can do, but this is what a bigger community can do, and a bigger ecosystem. So maybe tell us a little bit about that for Insight. What's your vision for that leveraged community and ecosystem you're building?
Yeah, we're a couple of years in now, like 4 or 5 years in, and we've got a really big community now. As you mentioned, like we probably have 40 or 50 entrepreneurs in our community. And my hope is actually that as some of them have gotten to scale, some of the first investments and partnerships we made 5 years ago, like, these folks are now running 100 million plus businesses. So they're actually, I hope there's an opportunity that we actually have, like, within Insight, mentorship opportunities where it's not all leaning on me and Swati. But yeah, like it's a really cool opportunity. And I think a lot of the entrepreneurs in our portfolio are driven by that community. It's unlike a typical VC in that, like, we're all just a bunch of entrepreneurs trying to build something. And there's not you have to put on a show for your investor kind of conversation. It's like, you can be honest and be transparent with what's really going on in the day to day. And like, a lot of what I do is actually just like HR advice. Like, every startup has it, right? Like, and regardless how deep or hard the technology is, people problems are still people problems.
Yeah. One of the things I've loved about folks that I've met through Insight is I can rely on the fact that anyone I meet is thinking about how to be a responsible entrepreneur and a responsible leader in really incredible ways. And I've been inspired by some of the folks. So I'd like to turn in. Yeah, I'd like to talk about that a little bit. And I think for this audience, what does it mean to you to be a responsible technology founder or leader? Yeah.
So part of this came from the vision that my wife Swati and I see for the world. Like, we want to see a world where the folks who are achieving success and accumulating wealth have the right mission orientation, the right ethics, you could say. And to date, the Valley has not operated that way. And the Valley I'll use in the general sense. Like, the Valley has spoken of itself as a meritocracy. And the reality is, one, that's not the case. And two, VCs effectively are making decisions when they make an investment decision of which founders they'd like to see accumulate massive wealth. And that doesn't always happen that way, but that's a decision that Swati and I are becoming cognizant of making. So, frankly, we want to see folks who are going to go out and do right in the world. And look, I like being in philanthropy in Silicon Valley. I gotta say, it's embarrassing. There are so many successful tech founders who do not give back, and that's give back in a lot of, not just monetarily, but with their time, with their expertise, with their platform. So we're doing it, and we are sponsoring and encouraging our entrepreneurs to do the same. In fact, that is one of the decisions we look at when we choose to back someone is, are these the kind of folks we'd like to see be successful in the world? Not just, is this business cool, or is this business going to make money? That's actually like the tertiary decision. The first is like, are these the people that should achieve success? And is this a mission that they're on that is of worthy cause? That's like a big moral responsibility on us as investors. I mean, I'm very cognizant of like my own privilege and the fact that I'm even able to make those decisions is a remarkable privilege. But you got to at least be cognizant of what seat you're in.
I think the intentionality there is just really inspiring. And just an anecdote, I was chatting with Keely on your team the other day. And it was great. It was perfect. It was like a Matt and Swati insight moment, which was, she said, oh yeah, well, we're trying to be really intentional about which founders we fund and where they come from geographically, diversity in terms of race and gender. And I had seen that. And she said, yeah, like that was one of our OKRs this year, was go find out like where are all the communities of founders that we're not funding. And I loved it on two dimensions. One was A, the intentionality, but B, that like you've got OKRs in your small shop, you know.
You can't do what you don't track.
So tell us about the push and how you think about being able to support a more diverse group of entrepreneurs on different dimensions. It's something that I'm sure a lot of folks in the audience have in mind right now.
Yeah, I think to date, and you know, again, I think we're at a moment of change. There has been a geographic advantage of being based in the greater San Francisco Bay Area when building technology companies. And actually, if anything, this moment should be teaching us that you could be anywhere and build a company. That's the reality. And I can't tell you how many VCs I've worked with over the decades that you always have to drive to them. And so like, if you're not in the greater San Francisco Bay Area, assume you're getting on a plane for every meeting, which is, I mean, that's not how the world should work. Like I worked with a VC at my previous company that would not like basically drive within a 10-mile radius of Palo Alto. Like if you were not within 10 miles of Palo Alto, he's not coming to your office. It's not the way the world should work. And we've got problems of global scale, and we've got a very diverse humanity. And if all of our companies are popping out of, let's call it the greater Silicon Valley area or the greater Boston area, we are missing out on a lot of the brilliance of humanity. And we're also missing out on a lot of the human condition. And frankly, like you experience different things based on where you grew up, based on who you are and where you're from. And there are great ideas that come out from all over the country and all over the world. So like we should go to where the talent is, not the other way around. Yeah.
I love that perspective. I mean, you know, you grew up in Gainesville.
Right.
I grew up in Pittsburgh, so I feel like I can, you know, I get a sense of what that's like. And I think the intention to bring the opportunities that come from the innovation economy there. I agree with you completely that, you know, COVID, this should be one of those COVID silver lining aspects, which is the recognition that, you know, we can support this. At the same time, you know, I want to go one level deeper on this idea of supporting diverse founders, because it's something that we're trying to also be really intentional about at Activate. One of the things that's personally stuck with me as a hard aspect of this, my wife has this phrase that she occasionally turns to me with, and you know, it's tongue in cheek, but she, you know, it's the God give me the confidence of a mediocre white man. And I bring it up here because obviously, you know, here we are, two privileged, you know, white men having a conversation about diversity and opportunity, but this idea of confidence. I said to my wife once, you know, one of the things that's hard for me is what makes an amazing entrepreneur. What's one of the things that makes an amazing entrepreneur? What's one of the things that I feel I have to express as much as I can to be successful? It's that idea of being able to confidently say, here's what the future is going to look like.
That's right.
And build towards it. You know, what I like to say about Edison is, you know, Edison was a total bullshitter in terms of saying like, yeah, you know, here's what's going to happen. and yet like made those visions a reality. And one of the things that's tough is if you don't have for free some of the confidence that comes from being in a privileged position, how do you compensate for that, or how do you leverage your muscle, and how do you do this, Steve Jobs reality distortion field thing? Or is that just bullshit? You don't need to do that. And we need to think really differently about how we interact with entrepreneurs. Back to your point of how do you be responsible as an investor?
Yeah, I think a lot of it starts even before someone decides to go on our journey, to go on their entrepreneurial journey. I think the safety net to be able to even step on the plank is already hard enough. And like I've already kind of thought through my own privilege in that I had a stable job. I went to a good school to enable me to then jump off the plank at Apple and start my own company. Like that alone is a unique privilege that I'd say like as a mediocre white man, I was able to do. So I think like at least the way Swati and I look at this is it's a lot broader. This is more than just about venture capital. This is about social safety nets. This is about how governments allocate dollars. It's about education. It's about paid family leave. Like all these things actually are key ingredients to allowing people to actualize their dreams. And like the American dream, like it's eroding because of a lot of these, let's call it erosion of safety nets. And these are things that we can't stand for. And like, that's one of the reasons why Insight does more than just technology investing. That's why we do public policy work and political work, because those are really important levers, especially when you talk about things of this scale.
I'm realizing just on time, there's some questions that have popped up, and to the audience, thanks so much for the engagement here. I was waiting to find ones that were really provocative and deep. People are being pretty tame, but let's look at a couple of these. I think, one that just comes up on this topic, the question came in. One problem is that female confidence is not seen in the same light as male confidence. We cannot play by the same rules as white men and be successful. So how do we change this? And what comes to mind is, there's a great study, and I think a TED Talk around the idea that, women entrepreneurs often get questions which are the doomsday questions, the why can't it work, as opposed to male entrepreneurs getting the like, tell me about how it's going to change the world, which has been reinforced by some of our work with our fellows and interactions we've seen. What's your take on that? And maybe, I imagine that Swati has a pretty strong view as well. Maybe you can bring in.
She tells so many stories of being labeled too aggressive. Or hard to work with is one of the other ones that she's heard over her career. And like, if I were in her shoes, no one would have said that. Like he's a leader or he's confident. That's not like we use the wrong labels. And I think some of it comes to, changes in the social fabric that we need to push on. Like at the minimum, folks who are in these decision-making capacities, especially making investment decisions, need like thorough bias training. Like it was ingrained in us at Apple and further ingrained in us as we built the team at Nest, especially as we thought about like promotion decisions and compensation decisions. That are we using the same lens? And we would often hear it in like promotion committees at Google, like she's aggressive. That's the most common. And you have to be trained to listen for those flags. And when you have diverse rooms, like when that promotion committee is made up of a whole slew of people from all different backgrounds, it's easier to catch those biases. But like, let's say like if you've got a room full of all 20-ish year old white men from Stanford, you may miss those biases because you get this groupthink. So like, it's clear that by building diverse teams, you get better outcomes, not just fairer outcomes, you actually get better outcomes. There's been numerous studies on exactly that. And that's one of the reasons why we push for it in our, not just our portfolio, but in the teams themselves.
Yeah, one of the things that just on this question of sort of confidence and expectations, I realize there are probably a lot of folks in the audience who, like us, are in a position, a privileged position, being able to try and mentor and help and support. Frankly, and I give a lot of thanks to some of our earlier fellows that we've supported from Activate at Cyclotron Road. One of my biggest learnings here was I realized at some point that the way I was supporting people from a mentorship perspective was through an assumption of trust and confidence. You know, if the receiver has been privileged or confident, then when you say, oh, you know, you could have done X better, you could have done Y better, like, you know, you're putting it out there as though it's totally with love, you know, let me help you, let's work on this together. But that's not necessarily how they're receiving it. They might be receiving it through criticism or you know, skepticism. You know, what's your other angle here? And so the recognition that we need to think really differently about how we support people who are coming into this innovation space from different angles. And sometimes, you know, the cheerleader hat is going to be 10 times more important than the constructive criticism hat. So just sharing that as a personal one. And I've seen, I think, that from parts of your team as well.
Yeah, totally agree. Like dynamicism of leadership and being able to flex to lots of different styles for lots of different situations is one of, like, at least for me personally, like one of the tools I use to be a good leader. Like if you're a one trick pony, like that doesn't work for big diverse teams. It also doesn't really work for succeeding. Like you've got to be able to be flexible, not just in leadership style, but in expectations and in attitude and all these kind of things.
We don't have a ton of time, but I'd love to talk, you know, when we think about the big, you know, how do we make the world better? You know, one that's always been core for you is climate change, and for me, and you know, I think about this one of the things I love about Insight is this idea of, you know, 0 to 1. Think multidimensionally about how we make the world. You know, like you can think about CO2 emissions, but you better realize like why we care about CO2 emissions.
Right.
It's about people. And then getting to scale. And, you know, I mentioned at the beginning of this that we were introduced by NOAA. You know, I think Carbon 180 is such an amazing story because at that time, NOAA was also out there saying, you know, hey, we need to be talking more about carbon removal. You know, why is this absent from the dialogue?
It was totally frowned upon. And
I would say, you know, now it's pervasive, the idea that needs to be a part of the solution. And I think I imagine for you personally and for Insight, that's that feels really satisfying, because without your saying, you know, in whatever meeting you had with Noah, I'm sure it ended with like, all right, let's go, you know, let's do this, you know, 10x what you thought I was going to say.
Yeah.
And you stepped in and you realized, well, no one is doing this. There was a great question here that came in that said, oh, I heard a podcast with Matt that, you know, as a roboticist at CMU, you know, no one wanted to fund that stuff at the time. And, you know, wondering whether that's influenced how you think about funding now from Insight to say, oh, I got to fund the things that no one thinks are important right now, but are going to be really important. So talk about that and talk about, you know, what are the other pieces of what we need to get from 0 to 1 and then 1 to 100 and then 100 to scale on climate, and how's it going to come together?
Yeah, 100%. Oh, this is basically what I spent my last 5 years on. So I love to talk about this one. Especially in technology, there's a lot of herd mentality. And the first of anything is always the hardest to get going. But as you're like, the reality is there are a lot of really big, critical, important problems that are just waiting to get going. And like Noah's example of carbon removal is a really good one. And it's worth painting that thread a little bit. So Noah was an MBA at Berkeley, deep environmental ties and environmental passion, and was looking at effectively like the IPCC models. It's like, oh, like no one has made one of these models that says we could get to a reasonable 2-degree model in 2050 without a lot of negative emissions. Well, who's working on negative emissions? Turns out nobody was working on it. Like there was like 3 people at Lawrence Berkeley who were working on it. There was $200,000 of federal funding for it. So effectively, the climate community saw it as like a pariah, like, or, crackpot kind of stuff. And I had a conversation with Noah that, it was simple math. Like, look, we're not going to be able to accomplish our goals without this. Who's advocating for it? And he's like, well, I guess I'm going to do it. So I wrote him his first check, helped him get started. I joined his board, helped him build his team, helped him raise more money over the last 5 years. And now he's leading Joe Biden's carbon removal task force for their campaign. 8 years ago, I don't think we even had a carbon removal task force on the campaign team. I
don't think that term didn't exist.
That term did not exist. Exactly. Entrepreneurs are able to accomplish remarkable things. And it's really about finding the right folks that believe in you. And at least for me personally, again, I've been a product of a lot of privilege. It's not only my honor, but actually it's my requirement to do some of the work that I do. I have to, it's a compulsion. The folks who are on these epic grand challenge sized missions that are effectively open field, that no one is working on, someone's got to help them get started. And that's really what it's about. And at least my hope, and as the evidence I've seen the last couple of years, is we've inspired some others to do the same. That we're no longer the only source of this, which is a really good thing.
I was sitting here thinking, God, do I hope you crowd in a lot of other people?
Yeah, Tom Khalil, who opened up earlier today, Tom's team at Schmidt Futures has a similar mindset and are backing very hard grand challenge size missions, or as Tom would say, moonshot size missions, at the very earliest stages. Again, but this didn't exist 10 years ago. It used to be the job of governments to do this, and unfortunately, the government has stepped back on what it is to innovate. And we've been working on that too. Hopefully a new administration, knock on the woods, will step up and again drive a bigger.
Yeah. Especially when you talk about the Noah story and the crowd again. I often say, right. So for those who don't know, Activate, we run a fellowship program for scientists and engineers. And the idea is to get folks from 0 to 1, meaning you have an idea, but you don't have the resources. You don't have folks like Matt to support you. And especially in tough tech, it takes time. It takes time to get learning cycles in terms of, if you're a PhD, how does the world work? It takes time to get learning cycles on, what are the actual risks of my technology? Where's the value? So we have a 2-year fellowship program. I should just say for this cycle of the fellowship, there are 4 more days to apply, but it's a 5-page starting, entry
Start now.
effort. So if you haven't already, you could do that.
2 years of runway to develop your idea and the support infrastructure to make it happen. And this is the key delta. It's not just the time and capital, it is the support infrastructure.
Yeah. And we like to say, 0% equity, 100% support for you as an individual, which is our mentality. But the reason it came to mind is, with this idea of let's crowd in others to do what you're doing.
Yeah.
I like to say, one of the most amazing parts of our work at Activate is we're finding latent talent that could be changing the world, that they have the motivation, they just don't have the framework to do it. And from 0 to 1 is an infinite return on investment.
It's true.
Right? This is in the best possible case, if you're in a philanthropic mindset or an impact, in the best possible case, that's where you're playing. And my read, based on the talent that we see applying to our fellowship, the talent that I see in the Insight portfolio, is we are not limited by latent potential, especially when you think about diversity and the people who aren't even on the radar relative to opportunity. There is so much potential to take things from 0 to 1, meaning, how do we get to 10 insights and 100 Schmidt futures? There aren't 100 Schmidts, so I don't know, but that just, it feels like such an opportunity. Yeah, I don't know. That's
government used to play a bigger role in this, and the last decade, government's taken a back seat.
Yeah,
and in some respects, like activate, like your own organization, or think about like Google stepping in for the roles that Bell Labs used to play. But like there's major gaps in our ecosystem that are relatively new gaps.
Yeah. Maybe government should be seeding new entrepreneurial philanthropists like you. That's an oddball one. And this is probably our last. Let's end on a really positive, uplifting note. I mean, you're really involved with politics. We haven't talked a lot about it here, but the idea that the government could be doing so much around innovation, around empowerment. One of the things when we talk about your Carbon 180 story, and when we talk about climate change, that gets me so fired up, and we've talked about this before, is the moment, right? So if we think about the moment, there's so much attention now on climate change. It's real. We've got a ton of new influx of talent and capital from different dimensions. And when I look at sort of the 0 to 1, how do we go empower and get things moving? Yeah. What I love is I sit here and I look at NOAA and Carbon 180. 5 to 8 years ago, there was no such term as carbon removal. Now it's like ready to scale. If I think about the engine, something that's been doing amazing work for the last 5 years, ready to scale. I think about that for Activate. Certainly, we're in that mindset. But Prime, Greentown Labs, Elemental Accelerator, Breakthrough Energy. It's amazing because it's like, oh, we laid all the groundwork. Now, in your words, you would say, all right, time to 10x this, or maybe you'd say 1,000x it, knowing you, Matt. But that's super encouraging. And so, tell me about how we're gonna take advantage of the moment.
Yeah, I mean, we do have this unique moment where record youth turnout. Folks are mobilized. Folks are excited. Folks are angry. And I mean, one of my existential worries is that we don't execute on this moment. But we have the opportunity to do it. And this is a moment of change, where not just we get out and vote, but we go out and we do. Whether it's working on problems that matter, whether it's joining that early stage company, that nonprofit, or taking a role in government, even though it doesn't pay very well, but because it's the right platform to get things done. I mean, we've all got to do it, and like these problems are not going away. In fact, like they're right in our face. I mean, we just survived the greater fire apocalypse of Northern California, unlike anything we've seen before. Like when you wake up in the morning and it literally looks like Blade Runner outside, and your brain doesn't even know how to compute that. Like, we're in this now, and we've been stuck at home for 8 months because of failure to act on global pandemic, despite it being obvious what we needed to do. And you don't have to be Bill Gates to see it either. Like, these were obvious problems it's why we have government, and government has failed to act. So it's incumbent now on us to be the drivers of this change.
I imagine that insight, at least between you and Swathi, if not the whole team, I imagine there are exercises around what do we want the future to look like? Not how do we react to the problems, how do we stamp out the dark side, but like, how do we imagine what the forces of good can bring? I had this image of Mira pointing to your shirt saying, that's a mood. When you think about Mira being your age, what does the world look like? What does it look like to solve it? What does it look like to have done well here over your lifetime?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think about the top challenges that face us today. inequality being one of the biggest ones. Like my daughter growing up as a brown woman, albeit a brown woman of privilege, my hope is that by the time she's my age, that these are problems that are talked about in the past. Whereas when we talk about, especially in American history, those problems still exist. Like, it's not like these are 1800s generation problems. They exist today. And I think we've got a moment in time where we could actually push on a lot of these, climate change being another one of these, right? Like, now is the time for us to act on climate change. And by the time Mira is my age, either we're all moving to Canada or like Patagonia because this part of the U.S. is uninhabitable, or we're really we're carbon moving at scale. We're doing regenerative agriculture. We've electrified everything. We're off fossil fuels, right? Like, either we do it or we don't. And it's not like let's try it a little bit and see how it scales. Like, we actually just have to go and do this work. And the good news is a lot of people want to do this work. This is like one of those rare moments where we have broad popular support to get things done. And you talk about like conviction as leaders, like, this is the time for those leaders to have that conviction and act.
I can't believe we were talking and what you said was either you do it or you don't. And Yoda didn't come in there. I don't know how that's possible.
Yeah, totally. I try not to quote the good man too often, but yeah, it's true. Like, look, we got to do it. There is no try. We have to do it.
In the spirit of inclusivity, and I recognize that I'm talking about inclusivity at a certain level here, but this is the Tough Tech Summit. The engine funds a lot of things. A lot of climate, but a lot of things outside of climate. If you had to be focused on innovation and technology, but you weren't allowed to be working on climate or thinking about climate, what are the next couple things that you'd bubble up as most important?
Yeah, health is the next one we do. Actually, and Insight does a lot of health work. We've done work in oncology and personalized medicine. We've done digital health being a big area. Health is probably the next one on my list after climate of grand challenges for humanity. Like, look, we're in it today. If we had a different platform for public health, we wouldn't be in this mess. If we had a different technology and business basis for how we develop vaccines and treatments, we wouldn't be in this mess. But like, the R&D pipeline for drug development is so long and so expensive. Like, of course we're in this problem. Like why shouldn't we be able to effectively 3D print treatments for diseases when they're developed? Like, we're in this mess, and hopefully this is a wake up call for all of us that we've got to innovate our way out of it. Yeah.
There were a couple questions here, and maybe we'll end on this note. There were a couple questions here related to, both when we talked about funding. Let me actually let me find it, because it says, it feels like we rely on the benevolence of uber rich people to create impact. How about democratizing funding of impact efforts? You talked about
the role of government.
Obviously.
That's the whole. That's what government is all about. So you levy taxes and accumulate assets, and then redistribute those assets. That is what government's job is, and government has failed to do that. So, yes, today we are relying on effectively benevolence of wealthy people to reallocate capital. It should not be up to us. Government should tax us so that those assets are then reallocated in a different way. That is literally the role of government.
Yeah. Okay. So government, government's one of them. There was another question here around, when you were talking about new technology areas, do you imagine we might be aided by technologies that accelerate learning and experimentation by the crowd? And I think a lot of these questions for me is just about, there's this sense of we'll all win if we can pull more people into this fight, from any dimensionality, whether it's crowdfunding to fund the technologies, whether it's get engaged in the community, whether it's civic duty and political action. So maybe this can be our last note, which is, how do we pull people in from really broad base and mobilize folks on the fight?
Look, I think folks want like a better vision for humanity and better vision for the future. Like, we want hope, and we want leaders who are projecting that positive vision for the future. And again, I'm fingers, toes, and eyes crossed that we make it through this moment, and we can start to rebuild and start to again play that role of a positive vision for the future, and get out of this downward spiral that we're in. Look, that's what America is all about. I mean, America is all about that positive vision for the future, that anyone could pick themselves up by their bootstraps and go make something happen. And I still believe it, but I think there's so many headwinds in folks' way these days that it's become really hard. That dream is definitely being eroded. So again, I'm hopeful. That's why I'm doing the work. Like, if I was like some of my other Silicon Valley comrades who did not have such hope, I would be living in a bunker in New Zealand. That's what a lot of these folks are doing. And look, I'm out there fighting the good fight. I'd like everyone out there to do the same. Like, it's what we got to do. We only have one shot at this.
I couldn't think of a better place to end. For anyone in the audience, now's your moment. Step up, figure out how you can be a leader and create that hope, and pull people in. And let's just hope that, Matt, that's what America is all about, is something that our kids are saying when they grow up, and, it propels forward. So I love this conversation, Matt. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Honestly, I know how hard it is to get time with you, because I'm always trying to. So the fact that we just got an hour to just hang out and talk was really special to me. And thanks for the engine for facilitating it. And I think, any last words from you? I think you already had them. But,
fantastic.
Track you down for help.
Yeah. And I look forward to doing this in person with everyone next year.
Hear, hear. I think it's the part of the program where I get to turn it over back to the engine, and I think Reed is going to be stepping on the virtual stage, hopefully with one of these great virtual backgrounds, to bring us home. So thank you all for the engagement and attention, and like Matt said, see you next year.